Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfoud, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Pat Flynn Show. I think we're going to have a really exciting dialogue today. I have two very prominent, there's a word that I just made up, prominent and competent scientists joining me to discuss, dialogue, debate the theory of intelligent design and their takes on evolution. Both of my guests have been guests previously on my show, Dr. Michael Behe and Dr. Stacy Trascancos. Welcome back, and thanks for taking the time to join me.
Thanks for having us back.
Thank you, Pat.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Both of the conversations I've had with you were really enriching to me, and I guess this opportunity came about because last time we talked, Stacy, you expressed interest in wanting to dialogue with Mike, and I'm like, oh, well, Mike was on not too long ago. Maybe we can actually make that happen. And before we kind of, and I'm mostly going to try and stay as much out of this conversation as possible. I think that would benefit everybody. But I would like to for people who haven't heard the previous conversations with each of you, maybe just start again with some general introductions and formalities of kind of how you both, a little bit of your background and what you're both doing now and how you got to be doing it. And then we can maybe set the stage a little bit on the things that you all agree about and commitments that you'd both be happy to accept, and then we'll give the space for dialogue from there. So if you wouldn't mind, how about Dr. Trascancos? How about you go first with some of the introductions here?
Okay, well, not to give my whole life story, but I sort of came into this dialogue in the first place when I became Catholic after having been a chemist, and that being like my goal in life was to work as a scientist. And then I turned away from that to stay home with my children, and then I became Catholic. And chemistry, like I always say, sort of led me to Christ. I started going down the logical path of Creator, divine revelation, incarnation, Holy Trinity. And then I studied the work of Father Stanley Yockey because I wanted to know what he meant by science was born of Christianity. That sort of blew my mind. And I now participate in this discussion. I guess my main message has always been that we need to go bigger. We need to see, as Catholics, we need to see all of creation as the handiwork of God and evangelize through that, reach out to people in our technological age and push them to think about who created all of this. And so the evolution debate comes in as a part of this larger discussion. And I have wanted to talk for a long time to both creationists and the intelligent design theorists because it's my premise that they don't go big enough.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. That'll be a good kind of kicking off point here once we kind of give the space for you to dialogue. And you know what? Okay, Dr. Behe, why don't you go ahead and give us your introduction, and then I'll kind of maybe state where I stand on all this. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. My name is Mike Behe. I'm a cradle Catholic, was born into a Catholic family, and I was taught in grade school that God could make life however he wished, and it kind of looked like he used this natural selection, Darwinian type process to make it, and that sounded fine to me. Who am I to tell God, what he should do or not? I grew up, went to college, and became a biochemist. Got a doctorate in biochemistry because I was interested in how the world worked. And I was happy as a clam. And I had no problems with Darwin's theory. But then I read a book which raised a number of problems for Darwin's theory, and it shocked me. And then instead of assuming that it explained everything, I decided I'd go over to the science library and try to find some actual papers or theories or experimental reports that showed how Darwin's theory could account for the crazy, complicated, sophisticated molecular machinery that we now know undergirds life. And it's interesting to think that Darwin himself and scientists of his time knew nothing of the molecular complexity of life, really didn't have much of an understanding of the cell. And so all of this is pretty new after his theory came out. And I saw that, in fact, there was nothing. There was no explanation. Pretty much everybody just nodding his head at each other, saying, yes, we understand. Yes, in fact, Darwin's theory explains this. But in actuality, it was just verbiage. There was nothing backing it up. And from then on, I became interested in evolution and became very skeptical. And once you become skeptical of Darwinism, an idea such as intelligent design rapidly suggests itself to you, because everybody in the history of the world has agreed that life looks like it was designed, and almost everybody except Darwin and more recent people have thought that it was explicitly designed because it's so functional and sophisticated and more. So I've been spending the last 20, 25 years beating the drum for intelligent design, writing a few books, going out and talking about it. And so that's pretty much where I am right now.
Great. So I'll briefly state kind of what got me interested in this and where I stand, and then I think we can hop right into it. And Dr. Behe, I think we talked about this on our last conversation, is, when I was, for many years, I would have considered myself an atheist. But when I seriously got interested in studying the arguments for God, I was always sort of able to successfully back it off the question of evolution, because the things that convinced me, arguments from contingency or the immateriality of the human mind, or even the amazing fine tuning of the initial constants and quantities just right at the beginning of creation, kind of allowed me to do an end run around evolution. And I was always able to successfully say, I think, okay, well, whatever that happens to be, whether Darwin's account is correct or whether it's not, that wasn't a necessary question for me to answer, to have I think a fully formed rational belief in God and then ultimately in Christianity. So I just want to offer that to anybody listening, is that I really do believe that however this argument goes, wherever the evidence kind of falls, certainly your faith does not need to hinge upon it one way or another. Now, is that something that the two of you would also both agree with?
I would say go bigger, which is going to be my mantra here. It's not just whatever evolution happens to be, but however we came to have this diversity of life, it's a function of the world that God created. God created it to be what it is today. And as much as we can in science, we should look at how that came to be. And I think Darwinian evolution is always going to be part of the story. And I don't think anyone today actually thinks it's the full story. So I like what you said about the end run around evolution. But also, in addition to being able to do the end run around it, I think we also need to dive into it. I don't understand what the problem is with accepting natural selection and genetic mutation, as long as we know it's not the full story.
Sure, yeah, and that's certainly I agree with that. That's why we're having this conversation. Is even though I didn't feel like I needed to answer this question to make up my mind one way or another about becoming a Christian or a Catholic. I'm still deeply interested. I'm super curious. And that's actually what caused me to discover the work of both of you. So with that in mind, Dr. Behe, if you wouldn't mind maybe offering some comments on that. And then also, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. I mean, there might be people listening who hear this term Neo-Darwinism or intelligent design, and maybe they're not exactly sure what we mean by that. So perhaps taking some time to just make each of these positions clear before we dive a little bit deeper.
Okay, sure. Let's see. Well, yes, I certainly agree that however you come down on this idea of what I call intelligent design, what folks call intelligent design versus Darwinism and so on, I agree with Stacy that we have much deeper reasons for thinking that God has created everything, and whatever is a result of his creative act. And as a matter of fact, I used to believe Darwinian evolution was true, and as I mentioned earlier, I was taught it in parochial schools. So there you have it. One can be a firm Catholic and take either side of this issue. Nonetheless, I think after reflecting on this for a while, I think there are some philosophical issues that are problematic if one does accept a completely Darwinian view of the development of life on Earth. And I won't go into them right now, but we can discuss them later if people are interested. And as you said, Pat, the terms Neo-Darwinism and intelligent design may not be familiar to everybody in the listening audience. So briefly, Darwin's theory is what most people know it to be. That is that there's random variation in organisms. Maybe a bunny rabbit is born that's a little bit bigger than its siblings, or different in color, or faster, or something. And maybe if that difference gives it an edge in the struggles to survive, it can outrun a fox better than its siblings or something, then it will tend to survive. And because it does, it has more opportunity to leave more offspring. And so that trait will spread in the population. That was kind of Darwin's original theory. Now, Neo-Darwinism just comes in because we've discovered a lot of things about biology that Darwin didn't know anything about. In particular, he didn't know anything about genetics. He didn't know what the principle of inheritance was. Now we know. We've discovered DNA, and we've discovered all sorts of intricate things in the cell, the genetic code, and so on. And so Darwin's initial idea, that is random mutation and natural selection, we've now supplemented with our molecular view of life. And that's dubbed Neo-Darwinism, just new Darwinism. And intelligent design is not opposed to natural selection. It's not opposed to variation. It just says that at a certain level, at least, this thing, the features of life did not arise randomly. They required direction. They required intelligent guidance. And the reason is that a random process simply cannot build coherently. It's like having a random process try to build some machine in our everyday world. And it's not because of any theological considerations, although I think those kind of can work into it. Rather, it's empirical, that random processes simply can't build the sophisticated types of machinery that have been discovered in life. So it's only the random nature of Darwin's proposed scheme that intelligent design takes issue with, and not at every level. Random processes can, in fact, change biology superficially, but at the deeper level, then ID says that intelligence was required to produce life.
Mm-hmm. So just to fortify and clarify that position, because this is a very common misunderstanding that I think happens at a popular level, is intelligent design is not, say, young earth creationism. It's really a specific critique on the mechanism at a certain level. And that's pretty much it. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. It has nothing to say about how or who or when or what mechanism or how or something life came to be. It just says that we can tell that this stuff was made intentionally, just as we can tell that, say, machinery in our everyday world is made intentionally, because we see how the parts cohere with each other to make something beyond the parts themselves. Yeah, that's exactly right, Pat.
Great. Okay. Well, now here's where I'm going to start to step out here and let the two of you dialogue. So, Dr. Trascancos, Is there anything that you'd want to add to that, clarify, or that you would object
Yes,
to?
I would like very much to respond to this, because, and I'm not looking so much to debate. I'm looking to find consistency in our ideas and move it forward. The problem I have with what Dr. Behe just described is, like I keep saying, it doesn't go far enough. I feel like sometimes, like the intelligent design people are on an airplane looking down at New York City going, we see design. And I'm standing on the street holding a mobile phone and going, wait till you see what's down here underneath the cellular level at the atomic level. Because I think there is design pervasively in the universe, but I don't think we need to start by saying, can we find it in science, and then say that points to a designer. I think we need to start from a position of faith and say, God created the world and we expect to find order in creation. That is consistent with the way the church has always viewed nature, philosophically and theologically, and it's tied very intimately to the divine revelation from Jesus Christ and the incarnation and the Holy Trinity, something I cover in my book about Father Yaki's work, That Science Was Born of Christianity. But specifically, the word random, I think, is part of the problem. I'm not clear what Dr. Behe means by random. I know that, to say the mechanism of evolution, randomness in nature, according to Darwin, doesn't explain or fully explain how the diversity of life came to be, that there's no mechanism that we don't understand. I don't think that necessarily means that Darwin was wrong about that. I think it means that we don't fully understand all of the mechanism. Like, here's what I'm saying about randomness. Randomness is something that we perceive. And the reason that we think things are random is because we don't know everything. For example, as a chemist, if you walked up and saw a bunch of leaves fallen on the ground from a tree, you would say, well, that looks pretty random. But I can tell you, as a chemist and as a physicist, there is a reason for the place where every one of those leaves fell. And there's a whole lot going on at the atomic level that is most definitely not random. A rotting tree stump is not random. There's all kinds of stuff going on below the cellular level, even at the atomic level and the subatomic level, that is completely not random, that is very ordered and following very precise laws of nature, which is what physics and chemistry are. So I like the line that Father Yaki promoted, and it's one I've adopted too, that there is no absolute randomness in nature. What we call random and chance in our discussions in the faith and science dialogue is really the limits of our human knowledge. And so rather than saying there's randomness in nature couldn't have brought about all the diversity of life, I'd rather say we just don't know fully how the diversity of life came to be today. Natural selection and genetic mutation certainly played a role in it. If it didn't, we wouldn't have different breeds of dogs. We know that happens. That's a fact. And so, again, then to put that into what I keep saying about go bigger, it's not that we have to discredit randomness. It's that we have to really think about what we mean when we use that word.
Okay. Thanks very much, Stacy. I agree with much of what you say, but I think you should actually go bigger.
Right.
We're just going to keep getting bigger and bigger. This conversation explodes. I like it.
I've got you on the airplane.
Yeah. Okay. Well, here I am on the airplane, and I'm looking down, and I see New York City, and then later on you tell me that, hey, you should see what's down here. And I go down, and this is my play off on your analogy, okay. Of course. You go down, and you're looking at your cell phone and pointing to it. I says, that's great. Yeah, look at that design, and look at these big buildings. And you say, well, we don't know how those big buildings got there, but we can tell this cell phone was designed. I'm saying I agree with you that the laws of nature, the existence of matter, the fine-tuning of the universe, and so on, that's terrific evidence for design. But it is not evidence that anything above that was designed, or at least it's not empirical evidence. You can, I guess, theologically, you can say, well, God created nature, but if somebody who doesn't share your theological premises comes into the conversation, they might say, well, maybe yes, maybe no, but God could create that, and then he could go back and relax, and everything would develop by unguided processes after that. If you, there are many levels that design can have, of course. If you come across a word, say creation, if you see that written in the sand, you'd say, I know immediately that was intelligently designed. It was not the result of waves. And even though you admit, say, that the laws of nature are designed, you would say that word in the sand, creation, required further design. That is that the basic laws of nature, without explicit direction, would not give rise to that word. And if you then saw that, wait a second, you look further and there is more writing. It says creation is the idea that God, brought the world into being. You see that whole sentence there in the sand. You say, holy moly, that word creation wasn't designed by itself. Rather, it was designed as part of all of this. And then you see that it's part of a book. And the book has an overarching message that neither just the individual word or that sentence has. And then you see that the book is part of a series that has an even bigger message. And all these levels of design, none of them can be predicted by the previous level. If you just saw the one word, you wouldn't know that it was part of a bigger design. If you saw the one sentence, you wouldn't know that was part of a bigger design. Same way with physical structures. We need the laws of the universe to say how stones form. Okay. So when you see a rock, you can say, well, I know that this required design because if the laws of the universe were much different, it would not exist. But if you see that stone and other stones arranged into a house, you know that there is design beyond the laws of the universe. That the laws of the universe would not produce a house, a complex house, by themselves without further intelligent input. So in my ID view, I agree that the laws that God created the universe and that the laws of nature were designed and much else. But I think design, explicit design, that is, God intending certain outcomes, not just any outcome, that explicit design is needed to further explain many things in nature, but particularly life, the structures that we have discovered in life, the codes that we have discovered in life, the genetic code, random processes don't give rise to codes. So I agree with you, but I actually think you do have to go bigger. And the point that you were making with the word random, what is it? You say that, nothing is really random. It's just our ignorance of what's going on. But another way to understand random is unplanned or unintended, unguided. And as a matter of fact, a bunch of Nobel laureates specifically gave that interpretation of random in a letter they sent to the New York Times when there was some evolution teaching dust-up in Kansas, I think. And what they mean by unintended or unguided is unintended by anyone, pointedly including God. That is that, hey, given the laws of nature, we don't need no God to produce a cell or to produce an organism or a giraffe or anything like that. So the folks who are saying that are explicitly challenging the notion that given the laws of nature, that the laws of nature were intended and that we can tell things were designed because just the laws of nature were intended. So if one is to argue with them or contest their claim that the most spectacular things in life could have developed on their own, then you have to kind of point to reasons why you think that that's not true. And as I try to write in my books, there's lots and lots of reasons. And actually, excuse me, I'll shut up after this, but one example you pointed to was, hey, if mutation and selection didn't work, we wouldn't have dog breeds. In my new book, Darwin Devolves, just out a couple months ago, I explicitly talk about that. And it turns out that most of the dog breeds are ones in which genes have been degraded, and that leads to certain features that dog breeders like. And in fact, it's not evolution; it's devolution. And that is, if for white dogs, the genes involved in pigmentation can be broken. For dogs with short muzzles, like bulldogs, the genes involved in the development of the facial structure are messed up. So that's an argument for limited evolution, but it sure doesn't get you very, very far. So that's enough for me for now.
Okay. So, getting back to words, the genetic design versus the design that I see at the molecular level, I do agree that there's design everywhere, but I just don't want to limit design in nature to words. I want to see design everywhere, but I don't think we need to start by digging through science trying to find evidence of it, because we're going to put ourselves into a position. The reason I don't argue this way, you put yourself into a position to people who aren't believers of saying, well, here there's design, over there is no design. And what you end up doing theologically is saying, well, God did this intelligently, but he didn't do this other thing so intelligently. And that's no way to evangelize. We don't, who are we to say God didn't do something intelligently? Maybe it's that we didn't see the bigger picture and how it all fit into it. So I I do think it all fits into an intentional guided plan. But I don't look in science anywhere to say, oh, look, there's design. Oh, look, there's design, because that undermines my point that the design is everywhere. And that when I see a rotting tree stump or leaves falling on the ground, if I don't think it's design, that's my problem. That's not a problem with my God.
Okay.
So there's that. Mm-hmm. Getting more to, because I guess one of my biggest concerns about this whole argument at all is the effect it has on evangelization. And I'm very well, just as I'm sure you are, Dr. Behe, there are plenty of people out there who say that it's all unguided, that it's all random, that it's all chance, that, we're nothing but the matter that makes us up, and there's no mind, and there's nothing spiritual. I know there's lots of people that think that. There's lots of young people that are being educated to think that way. As a matter of evangelization, being a woman of faith who also knows something about science, the last thing I want to show the rest of the world is that you have to separate reason and faith, and you have to put science over here and look for design there. And then on the other side, you say, well, I do believe everything is created by God, but yet I need to go pick out design here, no design there. I want to show the world what it looks like to integrate faith and science. I want to say, you know what, just like when I start my prayer before every dinner and say, thank you, God, for everything, all these gifts that you created and gave us. I want to start my science that way too. I want to look out at the entire universe and say, thank you, God, for these stars, these trees, this grass, my life, my children. And then I want to roll my sleeves up and say, okay, now I'm going to conduct some scientific research and see if I can figure out something about how it all works. And I do say that to people who are not faithful. I say that's how my worldview guides my love for science. And I've seen it have an effect. I've seen it have an effect on young people because it completely inoculates them from this confusing idea that they have to either pick evolution or pick the Catholic faith, that they can't pick both. That false dichotomy itself, which is perpetuated by Christians, and it shouldn't be, is what leads young people astray. They don't have to pick between one or the other. What they have to do is say, I'm confident in my faith. I look at the whole world and I thank God for everything. And when I do science, I'm just trying to figure out God's handiwork. And then when you see something that looks like it's intelligently designed, you go, hallelujah, this is wonderful. But when you see something that doesn't look intelligently designed to you, like all the scattered grains of sand on a beach, you still say hallelujah because there's design there maybe you just aren't aware of yet. And that's the way I go at it. And so I don't care if somebody doesn't share my theological premises. I want to show them what it looks like to share my theological premises. Instead of, I don't want to play the game on their terms. I want them to play the game on our terms. And give them that confidence too. I want them to look at us and say, I want what they've got. I want to love science that much. That's sort of where I come at it. And I think that if creationists, intelligent design people, and people who say what I say could all just get in a room, I think we would mostly agree on a lot of things. But I would also tell the people who are dividing to stop it.
So if I can hop in just here for a minute and maybe try and summarize a bit of what I'm hearing. And this was kind of my guess coming in of that I had a feeling that a lot of the disagreements that you two would have would be mostly superficial. And I think that or even pragmatic on the level of, well, how do we best get people to understand the relationship between faith and science rather than really substantial disagreements. And I don't think I'm hearing much in the way of substantial disagreement here. But I will try and push a little bit deeper because I can definitely appreciate both of the perspectives here. Because on one level, somebody might look at a snowflake and be like, "Oh, well, see, look, like that's random. See, that can happen randomly." But Dr. Trascancos would say, and I'm not even saying that Dr. Behe disagrees with it. I think he does agree with it. That well, actually, once you understand it at the molecular level and you see all the particle symmetries, you actually realize that there's really intricate sort of parameters or design that had to be there at the most fundamental level for that snowflake to even be possible. So I can see how Dr. Trascancos means in that sense going bigger, but at the same time, Dr. Behe, I see what you're saying in a sense. Okay, we can have something that's designed, say just the sort of blank pages of a book and the binding of a book, like that's clearly designed. But then there's other layers that still need to be explained that can't just be explained by the sort of the book itself, such as the writing on the book. So it's interesting because I can see where both of you are coming from. But I guess if I were to, just because I know that a number of people are asking about this, and I don't want to avoid it, but I do want to come back to the method of evangelization and what's the best pragmatic approach. But let's take one of the specific positions. Let's take irreducible complexity, which Dr. Behe is sort of the grandfather of, and let's talk about that and the bacterial flagellum. And I would like to know, is there any substantial disagreement that you have with the very specific arguments, Dr. Trascancos, that people like Dr. Behe would give when saying that there is a problem in principle with what Neo-Darwinism proposes natural selection can do on one hand, and the type of molecular machines we have over here on the other?
So I don't think there is a problem with it. I don't think there's a problem with asking the question, could nature, could physics and chemistry and biology, could there be a natural explanation for the diversity of life, for life itself arising? I don't have a problem asking that question and expecting science to give us some answers. But when we start talking about God put his hands on things and intervened and built the house with the stones, what we're talking about are miracles. And so I want to be very clear that if we're talking about miracles, we're not talking about natural processes. We're talking about miracles. And saying that there are stones randomly thrown around on the ground versus stones arranged into a house, that is the difference between natural processes and miracles. So if we're talking about...
Can I just interrupt just a second?
Irreducible complexity couldn't have happened because that couldn't have happened unless God did build it. Then we're saying there's a miracle there.
Could I interrupt just a second? Let me just say that no, that the stones on the ground versus the stones in the house is not the difference between natural processes and miracles. It's the difference between unguided natural processes and intelligently arranged intelligent processes. Excuse me. It's a common problem when talking about ideas that some people do, in fact, jump to the conclusion that this must have been an immediate miracle by God. But in my books, I try to explain, no, God could have set up nature, not just the laws, not just the constants, but events and very specific arrangements, just like those grains of sand on the beach that you speak about. If you say, hallelujah, the grains on the sand of the beach, I know they were designed by God. Well, maybe they were. Maybe the individual positions that they all end up in were, in fact, foreseen and intended by God. If God created the universe in a single act long time ago with its laws of nature, but also with the full understanding of how it would unfold, then that's design too. It is not an accident. It is not random mutation and selection. So the thing about design is that you recognize it by looking at the structure right in front of you. If you look at that house, you know it was designed. Whether it was designed by builders who came in and added up the stone, or whether it was created ex nihilo by God, you know it was designed in either case because you see the structure of the house. And let me just comment on another point that you made. You said that you don't have a problem with asking the questions, could physics and chemistry and the laws of nature account for living systems. And, maybe they could. But what if physics and chemistry and biology study and it looks like they can't account for the structures of life? Are we allowed to conclude that, in fact, science shows or empirical results show that, in fact, those laws of nature by themselves are necessary but insufficient to produce the structures of life that we see? And it seems again to me that, and many people have argued, that science is unable to conclude that science cannot explain everything about the world. Science assumes it can explain everything about the world, but what if it can't? And so I think intelligent design is essentially saying that brute forces and matter can't account for the structure of the universe and the structure of life that we see today. There has to have been planning beyond just the initial conditions. There has to be planning deeply into life.
Yeah, and I think we're getting down to the heart of where we disagree. Because, if the thing about design is that we can recognize it, I'm very uncomfortable with taking the position of, oh, hey, if I can recognize that as design, then God did it. But if I can't recognize it as design, then it must be random. I'd rather take the position of saying, if I can't recognize something as design, that's due to my human limits. That maybe there is design there I haven't fully appreciated yet. And so I want to keep looking. Because it seems like taking a position that's saying science can explain everything. Could chemistry account for the living systems? It can't. If right now in 2019, in my lifetime, I'm going to say science can't account, our understanding of natural processes can't account for living systems, I'm putting myself in a very arrogant position of saying, I know everything I need to know to say that. Because I'd rather say that just, because the history of science will show you there have been changes in theories. And the atomic theory itself changed drastically in 100 years. And so I'd rather take the position of saying, if there's some way that science as it's understood today doesn't account for how life arose or how the diversity of life came to be, it's rather because we just haven't understood God's handiwork enough yet. I do think God understood from the very beginning of time when he created everything. And as he holds everything in existence, I think he knew where every grain of sand would fall, where every leaf would fall. I think he understands where all the electrons are in our bodies right now as our hearts go on beating and we take breaths. I think God does know all of that. And all of it is very intentional. And if it ever seems like it's unintentional or if it seems random, that's due to my own human limits.
Okay, yeah, I agree with you, but I think one part of the disconnect is what we can conclude based on our faith and what we can conclude based on empirical evidence. I agree with you that as a Catholic, as a Christian, God is omnipotent. He upholds everything. He knows everything. He knows what will happen and so on and so forth. But I got interested in this because I'm a scientist. And the question that I asked is, can these random processes that are claimed for it, can they build these magnificent structures? And if you look into it, it turns out that it's kind of a Potemkin village. It's a facade, that there is no evidence for that. And so that's an empirical argument. It's not a theological argument. And I agree with you that we should not tell people to say that this is designed, but that wasn't designed. So this magnificent structure here was designed, but that those grains of sand weren't. I agree, we shouldn't say that, but it's a theological conclusion to think that the grains of sand were arranged explicitly. It is not an empirical conclusion. I think that the problem is that you say that science, just because we say science can't explain it now, doesn't mean we can't say it. They won't come up with an explanation later. And that's true. Science is always tentative. But the case for intelligent design is not a negative case. It's not, or at least it's not just a negative case. It's a positive case. That is that we are reasoning beings. We have minds, and we can recognize the work and the effects of another mind. And we do that by seeing the purposeful arrangement of parts, as I call it. When you see creation, the word creation written in sand, you recognize it as the work of a mind because you can see the parts put together to convey a message, creation. When you look at a mousetrap, you know it's purposely designed because you see the parts, the handful of parts arranged to do something. And in life, in biology, we see tons of purposeful arrangements of parts. And I should emphasize that this is exactly how we recognize the work of a mind, when we see parts arranged and doing things. And the greater the number of parts and the more sophisticated, then the mind that made them is at least as sophisticated as those that we can see. So those are a couple responses.
Yeah, I get, so it comes from my training in chemistry, I guess, and thinking of everything at the macroscopic level in terms of atoms and how they play together. But when it comes to reasoning, I get very hung up on the definitions of words, because if we're not defining words precisely, then we can stick those words together to make arguments, but it's confusing. The arguments are not clear. And I do get hung up on words like miracle, like randomness, like empirical. I'm not sure what people mean when they say empirical, because I that's something I would like to discuss. But I want to get back to miracles specifically. The Catholic understanding of miracles, which, by the way, I've read some of the books on miracles by Protestants, and it's different from the way that we precisely define miracles in Catholicism. The Catholic definition of miracles is that it is something that is done outside the order of nature. It's something outside the order of nature which we know. So miracle, like when there are Eucharistic miracles, when the host turns into blood, that is something that can only be attributed in our understanding at the time to God. There's no other explanation for it but that God worked a miracle outside the order of nature. And so to say, just getting back to the stones in the house, which we're using as analogous to life and order and the genetic code, to get back to that analogy, if we're going to say at a fundamental level that the difference between stones on the ground and stones built into a house is that God intervened in the order of nature and built something that nature left to its own devices wouldn't have built, then we are saying there was a miracle. That is consistent with the Catholic understanding of what miracles are. And we are saying the house was built by a miracle. And what I don't want to do is say that life itself and the diversity of life, whenever it looks like something is irreducibly complex, or when there are obvious cases of design versus cases that don't seem to be designed, I don't want to say, well, I don't want to use miracles to explain it. God can work a miracle anytime. I mean, I could fly out of my seat right now and start orbiting around the city of Tyler if God willed it. I believe that. But that would definitely be something outside the order of nature. It could definitely happen, but it would be a miracle.
Sounds to me you're taking back with one hand what you offer with the other. That you say that, God can do a miracle whenever he wants, but you don't want that to be the case.
No, I'm saying that when we do science, when we're coming up with scientific theories based on our observation of scientific laws, we should not invoke miracles as explanations. We should do science as far as we can. And at the same time, that's faith and reason. It's both. At the same time, we also believe that if God can create such a thoroughly ordered universe, he can also intervene for the sake of our salvation if he decides to. Both. So we can do both. But what I don't want to do is put miracles into science and say, well, because this life form exists, God built it. I would rather say God intended it from the very beginning of time.
Well, let me try a different tack. I'm sure you know that 100 years or so ago, that most scientists thought that the universe was eternal and unchanging. And then the motions of the galaxies kind of away from each other and away from Earth was noticed, and that was the beginning of the Big Bang Theory. Now, turns out that a lot of people thought that the Big Bang Theory had religious implications, maybe even a miracle, and a lot of them hated it for that. A lot of scientists, spit on the ground when they heard the Big Bang Theory, and some of them said that explicitly science cannot tolerate a beginning to nature because that's outside of nature. That implies a miracle. Nonetheless, it was consistent with the evidence. And if people had turned away from the Big Bang Theory, then we would have lost a lot of progress that we have since made. Now, by empirical evidence, and by empirical, I mean physical evidence, the structures of stuff, how they are arranged, how they function, by empirical evidence that nobody back in the day expected, nobody in the 30s and 40s, we have discovered that there's a genetic code, that there are sugar codes, there's codes everywhere you look these days, that there are machines, literal machines, undergirding cells. And in our everyday experience, just like, whenever we see a lot of things flying away from a common point, we conclude that there was an explosion in the past. Whenever we see parts so sophisticatedly arranged, we always conclude that it's designed. So what do we go with? Do we go with our experience in interpreting nature, or do we say, no, wait, that's not allowed. We have to look for an unintelligent explanation for all of these codes, for all of these machines. Well, I myself vote for going with our experience and drawing conclusions based on what we know rather than what we hope will turn out in the future.
But in my empirical experience, the whole periodic table is intelligently designed. Everything, the way the atom itself is constructed is intelligently designed. I mean, there's no randomness anywhere when you dig down into the structure of the atom and beneath that into the structure of subatomic particle physics. There is no randomness. It's all very, very much what we would call design through and through. And so
that was created, that order was created by God?
That is all created and held in existence by God in every moment. And I want to get back to the Big Bang Theory because I think that is instructive. I talked about it in Particles of Faith for that reason. When Father Lemaitre proposed the Big Bang, the other scientists in his time did think that there was an eternal or an infinite universe that was expanding infinitely. And he did have a radically different view based on his calculations and the observations consistent with his evidence that there was a Big Bang. But he himself, a priest, he himself was very careful to say that he didn't come up with the Big Bang Theory because he needed science to prove his faith. He was very clear about that. Even when the Pope said his comment about the fiat lux, that this is evidence of God because of the Big Bang, Father Lemaitre himself advised not to say things like that. He just followed his science where it went. He did the calculations based on the observations and disagreed with Einstein and said there would have been a Big Bang. But he wasn't doing that because he needed science to be consistent with his faith, or he needed to show that science points to the same conclusion he already held in faith, because he knew that science would change over time.
Sure. But he did think there was an early point in the universe, and there was an explosion after that, which was then kind of derisively called the Big Bang. He said that this motions or the instability in Einstein's equations would lead to this Big Bang. And similarly, when we observe purposeful arrangement of parts, it's always been our conclusion that they were purposely designed. Now, you say Father Lemaitre, I don't know how to pronounce it, I'm not French. Father Lemaitre was careful to leave God out of it. Well, in my 3 books on this, I explicitly say that this does not say that God, created these things ex nihilo. And I present a number of arguments saying how other people with other perspectives could construe this. Maybe space aliens, maybe other things too. So ID folks are extremely careful to limit their arguments to design itself and not say that it was God explicitly that used miracles, and that's another term of your own, not of mine, to design life. So that's in fact a caricature of the design argument, and just as Father Lemaitre could conclude that there was a beginning and a rapid expansion of the universe, but could not conclude to God from just empirical evidence. So intelligent design can conclude that there was design in life, but we are careful to say that that's not a theological conclusion.
But Father Lemaitre never said that because his scientific theory and his equations led him to conclude there was the so-called Big Bang. He never said, hence, that's proof of intelligent design. He didn't go there. He said, he always was confident in his initial assumptions that the universe is created, because that's the Catholic intellectual tradition. We look at the universe as created and we expect to find the order. And when we find it, we just say that is evidence of design, but we expect to see it everywhere. I mean, that's what I don't understand. Why pick apart and say, I can see design here. I recognize this as design here. I don't recognize this other thing as design. Why not just say that God created everything and it's all intelligently designed? And if something doesn't look like design to us, it's because we don't see it. Maybe we don't see it, but it doesn't mean that it's not there.
Well, because you couldn't write that in a science paper, though. You can't write, in the Journal of the American Chemical Society that I see, that all of this is designed. That the results of my reactions were designed. That everything was designed.
But you shouldn't write that in a science paper.
But what if you designed it so that it would produce some helpful effects? Suppose it produced light in response to something else. Suppose, chemists can design reactions, or they can see what reactions occur and what they're doing. How can you tell the difference? And if you see one that doesn't look like anything, then you say, well, it's statistics and so on. It's in what we expect just from statistical parameters. But if you see something like the BZ reaction, if you're familiar with that, the Belousov-Jabotinsky reaction, where there's periodic changes in colors it's a nonlinear reaction, and you need very specific set up conditions to make that. So how would you phrase your result for something like the BZ reaction versus some other random statistical event? How would you phrase those differently in your manuscript to JACS?
Yeah, when you write a scientific paper, you just write what your observations are and what your scientific explanations for. I very much, and the church very much encourages us to respect the limits of each discipline. It doesn't mean that I can't be a Catholic and be a scientist, but it does mean I can write a scientific paper and only talk about the science. I can talk about what was observed. I can talk about the parameters for my experiments. I can talk about the conclusions I draw from the data I collect.
Well,
write it into the bigger picture. But I don't need to put into a JACS scientific paper that, this is all design, praise God. I'm living that way anyway. And anybody who would know me, I would hope, knows that I live that way. And that's what the Society for Catholic Scientists is all about, that Dr. Stephen Barr started. We pervasively view things that way, but it doesn't mean that I can give you an example. So like my husband and I moved down to Texas a couple of years ago, my birthplace, where my parents live. My own children noticed the difference in the cultures. Down here, it's very heavily Protestant, and you see Bible verses on everything. And my children are like, why do people have to keep putting Bible verse? A plumbing truck went by and it had a Bible verse. It's like everything for Jesus, everything for Jesus. Why can't people just be confident in their faith and it's known that they do everything through their lens of faith? It's almost like when you have to tack, oh, hey, this is design, or, oh, hey, here's this Bible verse. When you have to tack it onto everything, it's almost like you're trying to convince yourself that.
Well, yeah, I'm not. I think that a big problem is that you want to be, make people confident in their faith, and I want to affect the scientific interpretations of results that have been discovered in biology in the past 50, 60 years. If you believe that every atom is created and so on, you still believe in statistics. And folks in biology think that just by statistics, random changes in the genome, plus selection, you can get all this really fancy stuff. And if you look at the actual evidence, you see that it's, in fact, non-existent. Not just non-existent, it's negative. That these processes that they credit actually break things real easily. And sometimes those breaking something can give a beneficial effect, and that can be selected.
But what you just explained is beyond science already. All I'm saying is keep science within its limits. If somebody's going to look at a little bit of evidence in science and conclude all this came from that, like you're saying that the non-believers do in science, all you need to do is point out to them that they have stepped outside the bounds of science into philosophy and possibly even theology, and that they ought not do it. But then we have to also not do it. And, you can be integrated. You can have an integrated view guided by your faith of how you look at science. But you can also compartmentalize. You can also just talk about science, just like I can also just talk about accounting with the accountant down the hall in the chancery. We can just talk about accounting. We can just talk about the nuts and bolts without losing that integrated view that everything is created and held in existence by God. And I don't, again, like I said before, I don't want to play the game on their terms because they're playing it wrong. And I don't want to start crossing the boundaries of science and talking about philosophy and theology as science. I'd rather say, everybody go to your own rooms and calm down, and then let's come back together and talk about how to integrate responsibly faith, science, theology, philosophy, because there is a responsible way to integrate those things. And I agree with you. Right now, in our moment in history, it hasn't been integrated well at all. And before,
that's what we're doing right here.
Be clear about the limits of each discipline.
Yeah, well, that's fine, but I think you're developing a private community, which is okay, which kind of disregards many of the challenges that have been flung at at theists in the past 100 years. And folks like, say, Richard Dawkins and those of his ilk get large audiences of impressionable kids and college kids and so on. And they say that science, with a capital S, science shows that we have no need for a creator. We have no need for a designer. We don't even have need for a creator for those electrons and those laws of nature, because people have shown that the universe can pop into existence from nothing.
No, they haven't.
Well, I'm saying Dawkins says that, which he certainly does. So the problem is that they will deny design at every level. And if you want to engage their arguments, if you want to help kids who are confused by their arguments, then it behooves a person to know when they are grossly exaggerating, when they don't even know their own philosophical premises, when they don't even know their own science. They're exaggerating their own science, and that can help some people too.
I don't want to play the game on their terms. Just because Richard Dawkins goes into bad philosophy and makes theological conclusion that science shows there's no need for a designer, I don't want to get down on his level and say, well, science does show there's a need for a designer. I want to stay up here on the hill and say, that's bad philosophy. What he's doing is not respecting the limits of the discipline. Here's how we are to think. We are to understand that when we do science, we're studying the natural world. When we talk about philosophy, we're sort of stepping back and asking, what is everything? What's the meaning of all of this? And when we're doing theology, we're taking what God has revealed and we're trying to use that to guide our understanding of everything else, our existence, meaning, purpose.
Yeah, but I'm sure you know that
way, because I think if the goal here in all of this, and I do think this is the goal here is to lead souls to heaven. And if the goal in all of this discussion about evolution and Darwinian evolution and intelligent design, if it's to lead people to heaven, giving people the idea that they've either got to pick evolution or pick their faith is causing people to be confused and led astray. What we need to be telling people is that you don't have to pick. That is a false dichotomy. You can accept all the tenets as we understand them at this moment in time of evolution, and you can also believe the creed when you pray it. And so I would go that way. I don't like dividing. I don't like the false dichotomy. And I don't think I'm creating a little bubble. I think this is the Catholic view of things. I know this is the Catholic view.
Well,
science
Catholics have views on a lot of things. And I think your view is great. But I think it leaves some things out as I've tried to discuss. But I do want to make one point. I think you'll even agree easily on this, is that no science operates without a philosophy, whether it's stated or unstated, because science has to posit what sorts of entities might exist. As you know, Isaac Newton himself was opposed when he proposed his theory of gravity, because it struck some other folks at that time as positing, occult forces between bodies that were not in contact, and that seemed a lot like old, angelic explanations for the orbits of the planets. So, nonetheless, Newton had a good point, because he could describe motions of planets and motions of cannonballs and so on. So you can't do science without philosophy, because science posits theories, and theories are an odd mix of both some data and some logic and reasoning, and your logic and reasoning can only depend on what you think can exist. So there's not that clean distinction. As a matter of fact, science depends on much more basic modes of reasoning, like logic, like the acknowledgement that a real world exists. It's not just in our mind, and many other things.
But I want, and I agree with that. But when we're engaging with atheists or young people who are confused, I think it's better to say that this is what science looks like through the lens of faith. And it's okay to attack bad philosophy. If, one thing I like to say to people, because this is true, anybody who does science, whether they realize it or not, has to take the worldview of Catholicism. To do science, you have to look at the world as creation, assume that it's ordered, and go out and try to discover the natural laws. And it was that mindset that actually gave the breath to modern science back way before the scientific revolution, because that's how the Catholic scholars viewed the world. And so rather than saying, well, that's your philosophy and how you interpret science, and that's your philosophy and how you interpret science, I want to show what the true philosophy is, what the right view of science is from the beginning, that we look at it through our lens of faith as everything is ordered and created. And point out, it's enough to point out to a Richard Dawkins or anybody else who follows him, to even do science in the first place, you have to have the Catholic worldview, whether you realize it or not. You can't view the world as some living organism or some completely random, just happened by chance. You can't view it that way. You have to view it as ordered. And so where they're taking a very myopic slice of reality and trying to explain everything, we Catholics are going bigger. We're looking at the full reality, the spiritual, the physical, the eternal destiny and salvation, the origins that before even the Big Bang, that God decided to create everything. We're taking the biggest view possible. And I don't want to put boxes around us and say we have to compete with their philosophies. I just want to say this is the right way to view things and promote that.
So I want to hop in again just real quick, because I think I have something that might help us to gain a little bit more clarity here. And since we brought up everybody's friend Richard Dawkins, I just let me read this real quick, because this is I think this actually is relevant to both of the perspectives that the two of you are looking at this through, and I'd just be curious how each of you would respond to this. So this is Dawkins' central argument from his wonderful book, The God Delusion, everybody's favorite New York Times bestseller. One of the greatest challenges to the human intellect has been to explain how the complex and probable appearance of design in the universe arises. 2, the natural temptation is to attribute the appearance of design to actual design itself. 3, the temptation is a false one because the designer hypothesis immediately raises the larger problem of who designed the designer. 4, the most ingenious and powerful explanation is Darwinian evolution by natural selection. 5, we don't have an equivalent explanation for physics. 6, we should not give up hope of a better explanation arising in physics, something as powerful as Darwinism for biology. Conclusion, therefore, God almost certainly does not exist. Now, as a philosopher, I would say the main problem with this argument is that it's just patently logically invalid. There are literally no laws of logic that would permit him to draw the conclusion that God does not exist from any of those premises. And so certainly Dr. Trascancos is right, he is like just committing the most elementary and crude logical fallacy here. So he can certainly be charged with bad philosophy. At most, even if we granted all of his premises, I think we would say that, therefore, we shouldn't draw the inference of design from biology. That would be a fair conclusion from this, but certainly not that God doesn't exist. So I think you can just wipe away the entire central argument of his book from a purely philosophical point alone. But it sounds like Dr. Behe, you would specifically want to challenge premise 4. And say and you would want to challenge it from a scientific standpoint. You would want to say, actually, your scientific claim here has powerful positive empirical evidence against it. Is that correct? Number 1. And then 2, Dr. Trascancos, how would you prefer that we address Dawkins' central argument here?
Well, yeah, that's more or less correct for me. I'd probably expand on it, but I'll let Stacy take over.
What was number 4 again?
Yeah, so number 4, step 4, is the most ingenious and powerful explanation is Darwinian evolution by natural selection. And then 5 is we don't have an equivalent explanation for physics, so he admits that's lacking in terms of what he's looking for. 6, we should not give up hope of a better explanation arising in physics, something as powerful as Darwinism for biology. And then he draws a quite radical conclusion out of left field that God certainly does not exist.
Yeah, so what he's doing is using his science to support his beyond science beliefs. He's using science to prove there is no God. I just don't want to get into the position where we're using science to prove there is a God. I think we have to believe with certitude there is a God before we ever get to science. And I probably wouldn't get down with Darwin and argue about those things. I would just point out to him that he started, if you're going to the grocery store and you take the first step in the wrong direction, it doesn't matter how many steps you take after that, you're not going to get to the grocery store. And he's taking the first steps in the wrong direction. And so if we walk with him in that wrong direction and keep arguing with him as he goes that way, we're losing sight of the destination where we intended to go. And so I want to keep on the right path and just point out they're on the wrong path. Why don't y'all come over here and get on the right path? And I mean, maybe not everybody wants to evangelize that way, but I have tried for many years to completely agree with intelligent design. I've tried to agree with it, and I just can't because I don't think it's pervasive enough. I don't want to be in a situation where I'm pointing to one single thing in science saying, look at that one thing, that's evidence of design. I want to point at everything.
So I guess my curiosity here would be looking at his argument is one, it's formally invalid. So we have that. But then I would also press on premise 3, where he says that the temptation to attribute it to design is false because that immediately raises the larger problem of who designed the designer. Now I have a lot of problems with that premise, but the first one would be is that my room is cool right now because there's an air conditioner in here. And that's a good explanation, even if I don't know who designed the air conditioner. So just because even if somebody did design the designer, that doesn't mean that a designer is a bad explanation. So I would challenge that too. And then number 3, but I do think that there probably would be utility in challenging, right? Especially if, and I guess that's where I'm kind of agnostic on this. And I can see both of your perspectives because like if there is a good, strong empirical case to be made against a specific scientific claim, like, should we concede more ground than we have to? And I guess I'm a little bit cautious about this, as I understand, and I certainly appreciate, well, let's not play the game on a certain turf, especially because it's so emotionally charged. And it is. And that's why I think it's useful for people to understand you can take an end run around evolution. Like you really do not have to. If you are looking for a rational basis in God, that is, you don't have to settle that question. I really do believe that. But if we can make the case and just challenge Dawkins directly on the scientific evidence, is there utility in doing so? And is that case strong enough that it's a hill worth fighting on? Maybe not dying on, but at least a hill worth fighting on. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't think it is. Because I think you waste time on that one little issue and you're losing sight of the bigger picture.
Okay, but well, from my point of view, the bigger picture that you're looking at is actually turns out to be a smaller picture scientifically. And I got into this area because I'm a biochemist and because I had always been taught that all of these elegant systems that one routinely studies in biochemistry were the result of random mutation. And if you don't like random, you could just say normal statistical distribution of mutations plus natural selection. And in fact, nobody has evidence of that. And the evidence is that does exist points strongly in the other direction. So I appreciate the desire to evangelize and so on, but that's not my main goal. My main goal is professional. And that is to show that, in fact, these systems that we study, we biochemists, we molecular biologists, and so on, could not and did not arise by a normal statistical distribution plus natural selection. And the people who build these huge claims on that utterly unsupported allegation, well, they can deal with the fallout as best they can. But I'm keeping my biochemist hat on firmly. I am no theologian, I'm no philosopher, but I am a scientist. And the claims made for Darwinism are so utterly overblown that it's really easy to point out the flaws with them. And I think a lot of things follow from that, but that's not my job. My job is to show that an undirected process, an unintelligent process, a statistically normal distribution of mutations plus selection cannot explain what we have discovered in the cell.
But you're doing that by invoking miracles. And, the statistics is a funny thing. I know I'm not going to repeat that Mark Twain line, I swear. But to do a statistical analysis of anything, your statistical predictions are as good as the data you start with. So if you're starting with incomplete data in the first place, which we are in every area of science, we're starting with incomplete data, your statistical conclusions are always going to be not good enough. And so I don't think it's a big deal to say that statistics can't account for how something arose. It's like I said before, it's a function of our human limits, not that God just decided to ignore that part of nature on a certain day.
But I'm confused as to what exactly your point is. That you're saying that we'll never have complete statistics, so we can't use that to draw conclusions. But you're arguing that we can't. We should argue with the Darwinists, who are saying they've got tons of statistical evidence that does show this. So it seems to me that you're trying to deflect my argument by saying...
I'm saying we need to know what the statistics are based on. And a lot of times people talk about statistics without, again...
Well, that takes a lot of time to... I've written books on it, so I just have to refer folks to those.
So let me ask you kind of both this then, because I think the main challenges... especially that come to intelligent design, and Dr. Trascancos hasn't said this explicitly, but I think it's been somewhat hinted at, is this sort of fear that, okay, we don't want to fall into the so-called God of the gaps. And Dr. Behe, I know you've defended this before in our previous conversation by saying, we're actually using positive evidence here. It's an argument from what we know, not what we're ignorant of, to challenge these claims. But I think that's somewhat of I'm getting a flavor of that as it seems like a primary hesitation. And Dr. Trascancos, let me know if I'm wrong about that. But that is a very common charge that comes at ID almost all the time. It'd be impossible to bring up an ID conversation anywhere without somebody making that claim. So I just want to toss that out there and let either of you take a whack at it.
Yeah, that's. Let me just whack briefly here first. Yeah, again, I use the analogy of the Big Bang. The Big Bang theory was proposed not because nobody had an idea how to explain these galaxies flying away from each other, but because galaxies flying away from each other were positive evidence of a beginning and a rapid explosion. In the same way, we've found all these elegant machines, and we're not claiming design because we don't know a process that an unintelligent process that could produce it, but because in all our experience, just as our experience shows that if something explodes, the parts fly all away. In our experience, when we see such purposeful arrangements of parts, when we see coded information, the whole 9 yards, it's been our uniform experience that there is an intelligent cause behind it. I don't use the word miracle because I don't know exactly how it was introduced, but there was an intelligent cause behind it.
But yeah, so I just want to just think of, and then we can wrap this up because I appreciate both of your time and don't want to keep you here all day. But yeah, even with miracle, I guess, it's not like, so, say God from all eternity, because it's not like from a Catholic position, especially if you've got your theology straight. We believe in divine simplicity, God's changelessness, etc. It's not like God was kind of riding along and then he dipped his hand in metaphorically and was like, poop, there's life. But from all eternity, God could have set up natural laws, all the fundamentals, so to speak, that he knew, again, from all eternity, that at such and such a point, these what seems incredibly improbable would actually occur. So, yeah, I guess we could go probably back and forth on the whole, like, is that a miracle or is it just providence? And I don't even know if that's a debate that we can really settle, because you're not necessarily saying, Dr. Behe, that he just kind of suddenly made up his mind one day to kind of like, spontaneously sprout life. You would probably hold that, yeah, this was all kind of built in from the beginning, so to speak, but there's an extra layer or component of design here that we just can't directly trace by understanding, say, chemistry and biology alone. Is that a fair thing? I'm trying to find the middle ground between both of your position here.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. And as a matter of fact, I've described that scenario in a book or two. But I should also say that I don't actually prefer that scenario. I don't care. God can make life however he wants to. If he wants to use a puff of smoke to make things, hey, that who am I to tell him otherwise? If he wants to use natural processes, that's great. The final thing that we can decide, however, is that these things were intentionally, purposely, explicitly designed. More than that, it's hard to say, but yeah, that's the gist of the ID argument.
Okay, so Dr. Trascancos, if you wouldn't mind, we'll let you kind of have the last word and comment here, and then I want both of you to just give everybody some ideas on where to follow along and the work you've done and all that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What I'm fundamentally saying is consistent with what Father Lemaitre said when people thought he came up with the Big Bang to support his faith in the beginning of time and creation. Father Lemaitre insisted that developing scientific theories be judged on their scientific merits alone and not be used in support of theological conclusions either way. And I likewise, that's, if I have to insist on something, that's what I insist on in my own formation of arguments. I insist, and I reject anyone who does, any argument that does, that we judge scientific theories on their own merits. And we don't use them in support of theological conclusions either way. I'm talking about specific scientific theories, whether it's the atomic theory or evolution or Big Bang or anything. Don't use single scientific theories in support either way of theological conclusions. Rather, start from the point of faith and look at all of science through the lens of faith.
Okay, fair enough. This has been a really interesting and enriching conversation, at least for me, and I think it's been really productive as well. And I want to thank you both again so much for your time and willingness to come on and engage about what is, quite frankly, a very hot and controversial topic. It is. If I were to go online and wanted to rouse up people's emotions, I'd probably either just make some political comment or evolutionary comment. I don't know what would get people enraged quicker. So I appreciate that. And I hope everybody listening in, no matter where you're coming from, can appreciate this dialogue. My plan is to host more chats like this of people who may agree on some things or disagree totally, and just see if we can have charitable, productive conversation. I think this is a really great model example of that. So let's do one more quick round, but this time I just want both of you, if you wouldn't mind, to just kind of let us know of your latest work, what you've been doing, and where people can follow along with you and get your books and all that good stuff. So Dr. Trascancos, why don't you go ahead again?
Okay, well, my latest position since October is the executive director of Bishop Joseph Strickland's St. Philip Institute in the Diocese of Tyler. So I've really been enjoying this position, working more with people and less as freelance writing and speaking. So please check us out, the St. Philip Institute of Catechesis and Evangelization. Also, my book, Particles of Faith, has been rewritten as a high school textbook. and is going to be for sale before the fall term of 2019. So it's Particles of Faith, the student edition. It delves into my journey into Catholicism, and then mostly the hot questions, including evolution in the biological and physical sciences.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Behe?
Well, I have a new book, which is out now just for a couple of months. It's called Darwin Devolves, which argues that, in fact, random mutation and selection are actually powerfully devolutionary. That is, they break genes and but sometimes that helps and those get selected. And what we thought was positive evidence for evolution is actually turns out to be devolution. And you can go to the website for the book. It's Darwin Devolves, one word smushed together, darwindevolves.com. And I have there all the scathing reviews I've gotten from scientists, plus my own replies and rebuttals to them. And so that'll serve as a nice introduction. Anybody who wants more can easily find links to hop around and find more information on the intelligent design position.
Well, that's wonderful. I'll link all those resources from the both of you in the show notes so people can easily access them. I can't recommend the both of your work highly enough. Like I said, it's been a great privilege to be able to host this conversation. So thank you both for taking the time to be here.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
it was great.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.